How's all with you, man? All good?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember if I mentioned it, but I've been dealing with long COVID since March.
Oh, really?
So yeah, so like I'm probably at about like 80% of
Right,
normal productivity, but
right.
every day I have to just like pace myself. Um
Do you just
and
get
so like
tired? Do you get tired a lot?
it's more than tired. It's like exhausted at a cellular level.
Wow, it's
Yeah, and
crazy,
then
man.
like the the brain fog, which is really brain damage.
Shit.
Is quite like I just get these like massive headaches. Like any type of exertion. Have you heard of the term? Have you heard of chronic fatigue syndrome?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that's like what a lot of people from long COVID suffer from basically that. And that's, and then
Jeez.
there's post-exertional malaise. So like anytime, any type of activity, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, it just kind of like drains your battery. So like I'm constantly having to pace myself.
Wow.
Um, So like
That's
if I
awful.
work for like a couple hours, I'll just start to get like my head just starts hurting and then like I can't I can't focus on things and like things don't make sense and then like
Wow.
I'll start to like have problems finding words and yeah.
Jeez, man. I'm sorry to hear that. That's awful.
Yeah, it sucks. So but
Wow.
it's
And
been
have
on
you
some
got
medication.
have you got any like have you got better like since you got it first, or is there any difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell because if it's getting better, it's so slow that
Right.
day to day. I feel like yes, since end of last summer, I feel like I have made some progress.
Yeah.
But I I'll feel fine for like a few days or what I think is feeling fine. And then I'll feel a little cocky and I'll be like, oh yeah, sure, I'm gonna go take a 45-minute walk. And then when my girlfriend comes home from work, we'll go on a hike. And I'll be like,
Right.
oh yeah, bad move.
Right, right, right. Shit, I was reading about long COVID before. Someone was saying like saunas are like amazing for like long COVID and just
Really?
COVID. Yeah, even COVID in general. When I had COVID, I had like one of those portable sauna things, and I would do it all the time when I had COVID. And after like 2 days, I was fine. Like I got
Oh
it
wow.
bad, but like seemingly saunas, what it does is it just kind of you know, not I know you're sweating things out, but it kind of clears toxins out of your body
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So some people have had great success with saunas.
I mean, I'm open to trying anything at this point. I mean, I've heard people have good luck with nicotine patches.
Really?
Yeah, I don't understand why that works. And like, I'm not a
Wow.
smoker or drinker myself, so I'm a little like weary of like getting myself addicted to something potentially.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's like you kind of have to weigh like, well, would my life be better being a nicotine addict than it would suffering from the symptoms that I currently have?
Yeah. Yeah. Try the sauna. It's less addictive.
Yeah.
So like how does that work when you're like testing equipment? If you're like because I know you got that new one out that's the one that what the one
The
tape
one
equipment.
track, one
One track,
track.
sorry.
Yeah, this guy.
How,
Yeah.
that looks cool, man. I'd say that sounds. Is that like it is a tape emulation, or is it just like a Mojo
Yeah.
box?
No, it's a tape emulation. It's got our, I mean, we
Oh,
can get
that's
into it in the,
that's
I don't know
quality, dude.
when you want to start our official conversation here,
I
but
thought we started already.
yeah, I mean, I don't want your whole podcast to be about talking about long COVID, but
We don't, dude. I've gotten into mad conversations about everything, so it's all good with me.
yeah.
So like,
Um,
so tell me, how did you get into the area of like design and equipment and stuff like that?
yeah. So, I think my journey with recording music started probably in about 1994, 95. I had got my first guitar in when I graduated high school as a graduation present. And then when I went to college, I was playing guitar, learning how to play, and bought bought a used 4-track recorder. I had a
Cool.
Tascam 424 Porta Studio, and yeah, started making recordings to the 4-track in my dorm room, um, and then yeah, every time I'd come, my younger brother had a band, and every time I'd come home on break, I would make some recordings with his band. And then when I moved to California, started playing in some bands and really getting into recording. And obviously there was the digital recording was starting to become a thing and become more affordable.
Yeah.
And along the way, I'd always kind of had this interest in electronics. So my background is in engineering. I have a degree in aerospace engineering, and
Oh
I was
wow.
working for a very long time as a mechanical engineer, as a designer for Lockheed Martin in the aerospace industry. And so I'd always kind of just had that kind of affinity for tinkering with stuff and building
Mhm.
things. And I started to get interest. I was beginning to get interested in guitar pedals and guitar amps. I first learned how to, bias my own tubes in my guitar amp, and then
Cool.
it slowly led me towards the whole like pro audio DIY scene. I don't even know if I had built any pedals at that point, but I started to like modify my tube amps. I think that's really where it started for me, as I was starting to learn about tube amps and modify tube amps and build my own tube amps. And then I met a guy who was on Gear Space or Gear Sluts at the time, and there was that forum group DIY. I don't know if you've ever
Oh
visited
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. They
Yeah,
used to have what was it, Five Fish? I remember got one of those like kind of an API
yeah,
preamp. I built one of those. They're good.
yeah, yeah. So there was that whole forum for doing DIY audio projects, and so I started to build some of that stuff, and I became friends with this guy, and we would get together and have like total nerd fest weekends where we would just like geek out and build gear. And at a certain point, I was just like, oh, I really want to design my own stuff. And as I started to just learn about electronics and get smarter, I had connected with Greg Scott, who would later go on to form Cush Audio. And so at the
Hmm.
time, we connected, through gearspace.com. And um, we decided to, get on a phone call one day. We chatted, and he's like, what are you working on? I was like, oh, yeah, I'm trying to design this thing. And he's like, what my first idea for a piece of gear was?
Go on.
A 4 channel, like API style mic pre. And
Whoa.
this was prior to Warm Audio existing, prior to Cappy existing. There
Yeah.
were a couple Neve clones on the market, but nobody was making like an API style mic pre. But I was not savvy enough. Like I didn't understand how to get like electronic products built at that time.
Right, right.
And I didn't have quite enough electronics knowledge to make it. But I ended up making this prototype. And if I had just been like maybe 6 months farther ahead,
Yeah.
I think I might have like, preempted some of these companies that we now think of as like the de facto API style
Like
preamps.
Cappy and stuff like that.
Yeah, right. But anyway, yeah, Greg and I connected and really hit it off. And we were like, he's like, yeah, I'm gonna start a company. I'm working on these mods for this uh, you know, Empirical Labs, Fatso, and he's like, we should design something together. So he wanted to make a monitor controller. So we worked on 2 products that became the main gain and function junction monitor controllers. And and then after that, we followed it up with the Electra EQ, and that was really successful. And so this was around 2008, 2009 type time frame. And so then I designed the what would become the Chop Shop 500 series EQ, and I pitched it to Greg. My idea was I want to make a companion piece to the Electra, so that way it was like, a set of filters in this tilt style EQ to kind of round out the 4 band equalizer that was on the Electra. And Greg wasn't really interested at that time. He wanted to pursue some other ideas. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do with this? And so I pitched it to a couple other companies. And, um, I talked to my friend Peter Montesi at A Designs, and he had that company, Pete's Place Audio. And I remember talking to Tony Shepard, and he had tried. He's like, yes, Peter said, send your module to Tony, and he'll try it out, and then we'll talk. And so Tony tries it, and he calls me up, and he's like, so I don't really get this product. Like, he's like, you know, why wouldn't you just, why wouldn't I just move the mic? And I was like, because I was trying to explain the concept. I was like, yeah, I've got this box and it's got a tilt style EQ and filters. And so you can kind of just like dial in your sound while you're tracking. And
Yeah.
he's just like, yo, but why wouldn't I go out into the room and just move the mic? I'm like, you can, but like, but I want to just like, sometimes I just want things a little brighter. I don't want to change out the mic. I just want to like turn the knob. And
Hmm.
he just didn't get it.
Right.
And at the time, I felt like so defeated. I was like, oh man, like maybe this isn't really worth it. But it was really a blessing in disguise. And he did me a favor because they passed on it,
Uh-huh.
I thought, you know, it gave me something to found the company on. And so um, this was around 2013, 2012, 2013. And so around that time frame, I had also been kind of stewing on this idea, this concept that would ultimately become the silver bullet. And I had met my co-collaborator, Bill Pearson, also through Gearspace. Like we had bought and sold some gear, uh, between the two of us.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like toying with this idea of using mic pre's on the back end of my console. And at the time, I had like a Jim Williams modified Soundcraft mixer, and Bill had a rather large DNR Orion console, and he was using various stuff like I think the Cappy VP28s and some 1073 clones and some other Baxandall EQ modules,
Hmm.
and we both kind of realized, hey, we're kind of doing the same thing, and so we thought like, hey, we should make this. There should be a box. There should be like a Mojo box. Like everybody's recording digitally, but it's mixing through a console is so magical. Like, these older consoles
Yeah.
impart all this harmonic awesomeness. We're like, how can we put that into everyone's digital mix? And at this time, like summing boxes were all the rage, but both of us agreed. We just thought the summing thing was like complete bullshit.
Yeah, I think it's
And
bullshit.
yeah, it's like what I realized was it's not the network of resistors that's summing your signals together that's doing any magic.
Yeah.
What is the magic is whatever that amplifier is that's hanging off the back end of that network
Hmm.
that has transistors, transformers, tubes. Those things are what's adding the magic. So we thought, hey, let's do some tests. Let's make a prototype and like make a device with a like essentially a line amp that has some type of character. And let's just put that on our two bus and see if we're getting results to what some of these summing boxes are getting. And what we realized was, yeah, we can get something that is as good or better than that with way less workflow hassle. And so while we're kind of working on this concept, I thought, well, ultimately, we're either going to find a company to put out this box, which would ultimately be the silver bullet, or I'm just going to have to start my own company. So why don't we take this chop shop design that I have and just start a company and then see how things go and kind of get the infrastructure built.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened. And so yeah, Chop Shop debuted in 2013, and then in the fall of 2014 at AES, we showed the Silver Bullet, and then ultimately started. Then after that, we had a really amazing response at the show. Like people were like, "Oh my god, I had been dreaming of a box like this," or "I had this same idea, and you guys actually finally did it." And so I feel like that box was like the first dedicated two bus Mojo box ever created. Maybe the only thing close to that was maybe the Rupert Nee's master bus processor, but I think that was meant more for like a mastering thing, whereas we were envisioning, more of a tracking mixing type of solution. And so yeah, Silver Bullet started shipping at very end of 2015, beginning of 2016, and then it just yeah blew up from there.
That's class, man. You know, with regards to someone, because you obviously know more than I do. Um, why do people like seem to think that someone's just adding this? I get the impression that people think it's adding like a console kind of sound, but is it not just something very passive? The actual
I think
sound when it goes through.
I mean, a lot of those summing boxes are passive, and I think those
Yeah.
are the ones that aren't really. There's no difference in having a passive summing box with a mic pre on it than there is just putting the mic pre
Yes.
on your
Yeah.
tube bus. Like
Yeah.
I feel like you're going to get a very similar result. But I do think if you've got a summing box where each input channel
Yeah.
is got some type of mojo, then yes, that will make a difference because you can imagine if you've got like let's say you've got your mix stemmed out to drums, bass, guitars, vocals. If the drums are hitting two channels a certain way and saturating and getting some harmonics, and then the bass is, you're driving the bass into its channel slightly differently, and the guitars, etc. Like
Hmm.
that will give you something. And
Right.
so,
Right.
but I would argue the better you could achieve maybe a better, more flexible workflow by having a bunch of hardware inserts. And let's say you had a studio full of you had like multiple silver bullets or like a bunch of chroma pluses or chroma modules that you're putting on your group tracks on a
Yeah.
hardware insert, then all that could feed into a mix where onto your into your master channel where on its hardware insert you have a silver bullet.
I get you.
um,
I get you.
and so I feel like that's just a more flexible, more modern workflow as opposed to having to like push everything out and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
combine it.
How
And so like yeah, anyway.
go on. You were saying something. Sorry, I
I was
interrupted you.
just gonna say like I I won't say that there isn't a difference, but is that 0.1% difference worth all that struggle? And to
Yeah.
me, it's not. Like I feel like workflow is so underrated.
Right.
And
Right.
like
I get you.
and like having a really streamlined, efficient workflow like will trump that extra 0.1% sometimes.
Yeah, and I think just as people who make music and like mix music and all that, most people like that do it, we're kind of obsessed with the sound as much as the music. But most people who listen really don't care. Like they're like, "What are you talking about?" Like they don't really,
Right.
they can't really differentiate. I don't mean in a bad way, but they
Right.
don't care if it's digital or analog or it doesn't matter to them. Whereas, but there's people like that are kind of gearheads. They're into that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like
It's
you're
for
kind of
us. It's for
yes,
us
yeah,
to
yeah,
like as
yeah,
we're mixing, it's for us to be inspired. And
yeah,
then because we're inspired, we're going to create a better mix, which
yeah,
the audience will hear,
yeah, yeah.
right?
For
That's how
sure.
I think of it.
Hardware like you can have all these things about plugins and it sounds like this. Nothing beats hardware for me at this point in time. I don't care, man. I use outboard gear.
Yeah.
It just you cannot beat it. Plugins are grand. They're fine. They're cool. But this idea that some of these plugins sound like hardware, I find it kind of laughable in a lot of ways. It's like they're all very kind of neutral sounding. Like an EQ, they're fine. But even if you run, I know I've done it. I kind of these JDK EQs, and they're kind of based on API,
Oh
old
yeah.
API. Yeah, so
Yeah.
them, even if you just put the mix through it and there's nothing on it, it still does something to the sound. Whereas if you just put a plug-in on, it's not doing anything to the sound, So,
Yeah.
do you think that whole thing about plugins versus hardware, like people think there's no difference, but I do think there's a difference. What's your take on that?
Well, have you heard so we have two plugins out. We have the Chop Shop EQ and we have the Silverbolt Mark II plugin. Have you tried either?
They're plug-in Alliance ones. Whatever it is on my computer, none of them work. I've downloaded them.
Really?
It crashes every single one of them. Plug-in Alliance plugins, and there's other Kive. KIVE,
Oh
those
yeah,
ones.
yeah.
Both of them crash. I've tried everything because I'm dying to use them because I wanted to get the Silver Bullet one. It's just
Yeah. Are you on a Hackintosh?
no. I'm on a back in Windows. Windows.
Well,
What
maybe
am I
that's the problem.
yeah, probably.
I
Probably.
don't know.
And the thing about it is, it used to work. It used to work. I used to use Brainworks plugins because they were cool.
Yeah.
And they just, for one reason, one day they used to stop working. And every time I install any plugin Alliance plugin, it just crashes. Don't understand it.
Oh, well, that's a
Yeah.
bummer. Well, we'll have to like, after after this podcast, we'll have to like get you sorted out so you
Good
can
man,
try
good
them.
man, good man. Thanks. So but your plugins, like, because I've heard your plugins, they sound good. How, when you're modeling plugins, are you modeling them yourself, or just someone model them for you? How does that work?
No, so my team has developed our plugins, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Plugin Alliance distributes our plugins, but it's my team that actually
Aha,
created
aha.
them.
Okay, okay.
And so it's a pretty um, it's a pretty involved process. One of the members of the team is the DSP expert, and he's the one that is coming up with the algorithms to model the behavior. I personally, in the project, was the person who was basically verifying that the DSP was matching the hardware. And so basically like, everything that we did for the plugin was based on the schematic. And so they created a digital model of the schematic. And then you obviously have to make certain assumptions about how certain things work. And I think that's where software deviates from hardware. It really comes down to how good are the assumptions, and in the places where you're taking, I don't want to call it shortcuts, but maybe you're having a more simplistic model of the behavior of something. It's like, did you assume that something is less important when it's actually more important? And so so what I found when we were developing like the Silver Bullet Mark II was, there's obviously a lot of non-linear things going on in that box. And so the trick is really capturing that stuff, because that's where the magic lies. So as we're developing the plugin and I'm testing it, I would be obviously making measurements to like, like empirically see, is there a difference in the frequency response, or how does the distortion response match the hardware?
Mm-hmm.
But I was also using my ears. And so there was quite a number of times where I'm just like, there's something not right here. Like
Yeah.
I'm hearing this in the top end of, in the EQ. Like, how can we how can we get it to sound smoother? What do you tell me? What assumptions have you made? What are you doing? Like, um, and through that process, we come to find out like, oh, my teammate who was doing the DSP, he decided that something in the schematic wasn't going to make a difference, so he
Ah.
simplified it. And it turned out like, no, I think it might make a difference. Let's actually go through the hassle of trying to model that, even though it's complex, and see if that solves this thing that I'm not hearing, or this thing I'm hearing that I don't like.
Uh-huh.
And um, so it was a lot of that process. And I would say, making the software emulation of the Silver Bullet hardware was actually much more difficult than making the hardware itself. Because when I designed the hardware, it's like it was a blank canvas, right?
Okay.
There
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
no bar. It was
Mm-hmm.
really just, what do I think sounds good? Like, I have a certain set of design skills. I have a certain, collection of parts I like to work with. Let me put these things together in a way that, is, you know, to the best of my ability, let me build this circuit and try and make it sound as best as I can. And that ended up sounding a certain way. But now when you're trying to emulate that,
Yeah.
it's like, there's some things that the hardware does like unintentionally. Like, maybe I did something dumb in the circuit. Like, maybe it's technically not correct, but because of that, it creates a certain sonic result. There's
Mm.
some kind of artifact or weird nonlinear behavior. And now it's like I have this really difficult challenge of recreating that peculiarity, or that, you know, esoteric artifact. Um, and so that process was just super challenging. So it was like getting the plugin like 90% of the way there was pretty easy, but it was really taking it that last like 5 to 10% that probably took like 80% of the time. Um, and so, yeah, it was really just continually diving deeper on like these really small details. And like I said, just trying to like um, challenge assumptions to try and figure out like what's causing the magic. And through the process of developing this plugin, we ended up inventing some pretty cool innovations, which we then filed patents for. So we've got this process we call dynarealism. Um, and during early conversations about the plugin, Bill, who I worked on the hardware with, he kind of said that he always thought of his hardware as being alive. Like he felt like the electrons flowed through the circuit slightly differently on any given day, and it caused some kind of magic to him. And whether or not he was just being kind of like metaphorical or or I don't know, or he was actually being literal, like we tried to incorporate that concept into the plugin. Well, what happens if we don't just have this one model, but what happens if we can make the circuit alive and animate it? And so that's why in the plugin you have these, we call them flux modes. So like there's a knob on the bottom panel of the plugin that's called dynarealism, and you've got symmetry mode, which is like both channels. Everything's just like
Aligned, kind of.
yeah, everything's like it's nominal value. Like if there's a 10K resistor, it's a 10K resistor.
Okay, okay.
Then we've got analog one and analog two. And so the whole concept that went into the patent was this idea of okay, so other brands when they model hardware, they'll like choose like a golden unit, and then they'll maybe measure like, oh, this 10K resistor is 10.1K, and this potentiometer, which is supposed to be 100K, is really 97.8K, and we'll just model exactly that. Well, Brainworks took it a step farther with their TMT technology. I think it's tolerance modeling technology, where they basically tried to have like some type of statistical distribution of values, and then they allowed you to like I think what do they give you, 32 presets? So like on a
Yeah,
BX,
you could change. There was like numbers. There was different numbers on
yeah,
like the thing. It was an SSL kind of one and an Eve one. They had
yeah,
kind of I remember I changed
yeah,
those numbers.
exactly. So we thought, how do we make it even more real? Because everybody's like, with these emulations, the idea is to make it as authentic as possible. So we were really trying to distill the essence of what does that mean to create an analog emulation. And so I thought,
Hmm.
well, what if we built the digital model the same way that we actually build a piece of hardware? So if you think about if I build a silver bullet and I'm making a PCB, let's say it's even something as simple as like this little color module, right?
That's cool.
There's like there's a bunch of IC op amps and little tiny resistors, and there's capacitors. So this capacitor should be, what's it say on it? It's like 470 microfarad.
Yeah.
If I measure this capacitor and this one, they're not all exactly 470. They might be
Okay.
472, 468, right? And so when I reach in, when like say I'm the employee on the assembly line stuffing the parts into the circuit board, when I reach into the bin, or I or like the part is coming off the reel of tape, each part has a different value.
Hmm.
So we thought, let's recreate this parts bin system digitally, so that way the emulation is built from the schematic, and there's all these different reference designators. So you've got like for capacitors, C1, C2, C3, etc. So when you instantiate a Silver Bullet Mark II plugin, it's actually building the unit from the schematic, pulling parts from these virtual parts bins. And then just like the real Silver Bullet unit, when we build the unit, we put a serial number on it. So on the plugin, if you I forget where you click. I think maybe it's the where it says Silver Bullet. It'll spin it around to the back panel. You'll
Okay.
see a serial number. That serial number defines a unique build that is assigned to your license. So your Silver Bullet plugin is not exactly the same as my Silver Bullet plugin,
Wow.
just the way a real hardware unit that I own may be slightly different from the unit you own.
That's
And
cool, man.
so, yeah. And so we ended up patenting that technology. And one of the cool things is you can change the serial number. So if you're on the analog mode, analog one, analog two, flux, or BPM modes on that dyno realism switch,
Mhm.
um, you can change the serial number and it'll effectively change your build. And so
That's mad.
if you were to like say have the EQ engaged and like turn up the high end and the low end and um, run it through plugin doctor and look at the frequency response plot, as you change the serial number, that frequency response will change. And it's different. So like on the EQ, especially, it's the curves that you get on the left and right channel are not exactly the same, just like on real hardware. And
Yeah.
so
Do you
I've
think that adds a
long,
kind of width to it?
yeah,
Because you know, it's just
yeah,
slight fluctuations.
yeah, exactly. It totally does. And I think that's part of the magic of consoles, where it's like every channel, while it's designed to be the same because of manufacturing tolerances, it doesn't end up performing identically.
Yeah.
And then, of course, over time, parts drift, they fall out of spec. So we created this analog two mode. So analog one is meant to be like, you know, brand new factory build. It's got a slight variation from the serial number that came from before it.
Mhm.
And so analog two is maybe like a B stock unit where stuff might
Right.
be slightly more out of spec, a little more variation. Um, and then with the flux modes, this is where this concept of like animating the circuit came into play. So we thought, what if we apply basically an oscillator
Uh-huh.
to all of these parts that have values assigned to them? So instead of the nominal 10K resistor being just 10.1K, what if over time it can fluctuate between 9.97K and 10.06K? What does that do to the circuit? And so we've given just like I'm a big fan of Boss chorus pedals. You've got a rate and a depth knob.
Yeah.
So we've given people like a rate and a depth, and in one of the modes you can tempo sync it to
Oh, it's
um,
cool.
your DAW tempo. And so at the extreme settings, you can imagine like on an EQ boost, these EQ curves are moving, and so it can be pretty cool to apply, especially on a stereo source. It just creates this really cool sense of movement. Do you know? Are you familiar with Michael Brower's work? He's like
Yes,
a
yes, yes.
producer
Parallel
mixer.
compression that he does. That kind of sets up
Yeah,
multiple parallel compressions. Yeah.
yeah, and he's really known for like always moving the faders. Like he likes to always just keep things moving. Like everything is being moved around.
Yeah.
And so when we were coming up with this, I was like thinking of talks that I've seen him give where he talks about just like not keeping the mix static, but keeping things moving. And so that flux mode, it keeps the mix moving. And it can be subtle or it can be, obvious, which can lead to, some pretty creative results.
That's cool, man. Wow, that's interesting. So like why would people who manufacture hardware create plugins? If they're sounding the exact kind of same and you're selling hardware, is it why do that? I
Why
know
do
that's probably
both?
yeah. I'm curious why.
Why do it? Well, I
Yeah.
think, you know, not everybody's going to be able to afford a $3,000 piece of rack
Yes,
mount
that's for
equipment.
sure.
And and I think there's a lot of like it's like when I first started making records, I bought that Tascam Porta Studio for like $200 or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Yeah.
And that seemed like a lot of money to me at the time. And all I had was four channels, with a two band EQ. And it's like, that was it. There were no effects. Like it was just, push the faders around and turn two knobs.
Mm.
Um, so I think we're living in a golden era, right? Like the plugins are so good. And it's like, if you're this kid with no money and you want to make music, you can get access to some amazing virtual tools. And so maybe, we get a lot of customers that are like, I bought your plugin. I really love it. And I really would like to experience the extra 2, 3, 5% that the hardware is going to give me,
Right. I get you.
and invest in that piece of hardware. So I think as a hardware manufacturer, it's a way for new customers to get familiar with your brand and kind of like your design ethos and experience what your gear is all about without having
Hmm.
to make a huge investment. And
Right.
then for
Right.
people that already own the hardware, it's like not everybody's going to be able to afford 5 silver bullets, but they can afford 1 silver bullet, and then they can use the plugin for to 20 more times throughout the
Yeah. Yeah.
mix or something.
I
Yeah.
get you. I
Yeah.
think the thing about hardware too is it's it's tactile, and it's like you can
It is
kind of
tactile.
move it. And I think things that are tactile people tend to like. And I think it's becoming even more so with like people like vinyl, because you have to get up, you have to physically move it, you can look at the thing. And I think kind of a similar thing with gear because it's tactile and you can move it. You feel like, sometimes if you, on an EQ, I have one of these things in front of me, those, what you call them, soft tube make these kind of controllers, like plug-in, what's it called?
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
console
yeah.
one. Yeah.
Console one. I've got
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
I have one of those. And like, I'll just be turning that thing and I've done like 10K on something. And if you were to look at it, you would go, "Oh, that's too much. Don't do that." But
Yep.
when you're just doing it like normally, you
Yep.
it looks wrong, but it sounds good. And
Yep.
I think that's kind of a thing that if you have a controller with plugins, I think they're much better than just kind of doing it manually. Because when you do it manually, I find myself even, I go, "That's too much." You kind of mix them with your eyes as well, more than your ears at some point. I think that's as well as
Yep.
what hardware was such cool. People like they would do, like I have friends who worked on like crazy records like Zeppelin and stuff like that. They would tell me, like one of my friends, he worked on oh geez, what's those consoles back in the 60s in Olympia?
Ilias.
Helios. Yeah, he worked on the Helios, and they would crank those things up like massively, like but you didn't notice it because it was just like cranking them up. And I think that's probably kind of
Yeah.
the same. I think, yeah, that's my random point I'm kind of making. Yeah, that
Yeah,
type
there
thing.
is. I mean, yeah, it's a different experience when you're turning real knobs, and there's also um, there's stuff you can do with hardware that you can never do in software, like you can affect your sound prior to hitting that first A to D conversion, which
Yeah.
I found in my experience, everything changes at that first A to D conversion pass. And then you can do whatever you want after your signal after that first one. You could run it in and out of your computer 10 more times, and it's going to have very little effect on the audio. But that first pass is just so crucial to, capturing whatever you've got going on in the room. And if you've got, like, if you're tracking with a compressor or you're using, you're hitting an actual tape deck, maybe you're transferring your tracks off a tape, like, um, yeah, I feel like that's whatever damage is going to be done via an A to D converter, most of that damage happens on that first conversion. So,
Right.
so I feel like if you got a piece of hardware, you know, you can get that track in its best shape possible before you do that damage. Is the way I think of it.
Right, right. It's a different sound going in. Like if you're going in with a compressor going into a DAW than actually kind of coming out of the DAW and back in. It is a different sound. Like, and I think that's the kind of thing, especially my generation of growing up with DAWs and not with, reel to reel. It's like there's almost like a hesitancy to kind of, that it's there, it's done, and we have this thing of fix it in the mix thing. And I think that's what I
Mm.
love about the 60s and stuff like that. They didn't have as much choices, so they made decisions and they just did things and they
Yeah.
did crazy things. Like I did a video there a while ago on how Tomorrow Never Knows was made by the Beatles, and just all the crazy shit that they did is just amazing. They just took chances,
Yeah.
and the tape loops on that song, they could only be created once. They just did it once, and
Yeah.
I think that's what was cool about a lot of those records, which is different than nowadays, is that we have kind of infinite choices. And I think sometimes when you
Yep.
have infinite choices, you don't make decisions as fast as you should, I think,
Or
anyway.
you second guess them.
Yeah, true.
Right. I've got some tape decks in my studio, and for many years I was like really into just making records to the 1 inch 8 track with my console. And it was so
Ah,
eye-opening to see musicians stand there and listen and focus on the performances as they were being played back from the tape deck. Like when you're working with a DAW, what does everybody do? They look at a screen, right? They go, "Oh yeah, what's that thing on the screen? Zoom in there. I think we need to fix something."
Yeah.
Whereas when you take that visual component of music making away, I found that the artists were much more in tune with what they had done in their performances, and both in the moment and when they were listening back. And they would, it would be like, okay, you didn't play that perfect, but we could try and punch in, but there's no going back. There's no
Yeah.
undo. Like,
Yeah.
like we're either going to erase it and do something new, which may
Mm.
or may not be better, or we're going to accept what we've already done. And it just, yeah, it was like it led to a different result and a different vibe in the session. That was just really satisfying.
Yeah, it's a completely different way of doing it. It's like you were saying, you know, looking is so different, especially mixing. I think looking is such a different thing than actually not looking. I try and kind of turn off my screen sometimes and just kind of play it and just
Yeah,
listen to it. And you hear it differently. You actually do.
you do.
But back to your one track. How long did it take you to design that? Because that has to be hard with tape and stuff like that. That looks so cool,
Yeah,
man.
so here's the new module.
That's quality.
So one track is based on our. Where did I put it? Oh, I put it back in the closet. Anyway, you can see here, this actually
Uh-huh.
says Mr. Focus. So
Uh-huh.
when I designed Mr. Focus, it's basically a platform that is a 2 color module host. So these are color modules, like this for anyone unfamiliar. So these just, I'll just pop this out here. So you can see that this module just, plugs in here. And so Mr. Focus originally was designed to be this simple 2 color slot host with a drive knob, a wet dry, and then a tilt style EQ.
Mm-hmm.
And in the most recent revision of the circuit board, I ended up putting in a bunch of jumpers that allow me to configure how some of these controls work on the front panel.
Right.
And so we created the Tape C color module, which is based off of our Tape 79 stereo Mojo module for the Silver Bullet. And so it's a fully analog tape emulation. What I really wanted to do, so I've got these tape decks in my studio. I've got this 1979 MCI JH110A 1-inch 8-track,
Oh,
and I've
cool.
got a Studer A807 1/4-inch 2-track machine. And both of them are heavily modified. I've got the MCI deck is like got Jensen output transformers and like all the chips have been replaced and capacitors upgraded, and then the Studer deck, yeah, I like rechipped that one and pulled a bunch of coupling caps out. So I want it to be like super, super clean, like digital killer.
So you modded
And
them
so,
yourself, the reel to reels?
yeah,
Shit, man.
I
How long
did.
did that take?
It was an ongoing
Yeah, I'd say a while.
project.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just do it little by little, and
Mm,
but yeah, it took a while.
that's
But
sweet, man.
I knew, so I have an Animod ATS1 tape emulator, and
What are they like? I've heard
it's
things
really
about
good.
them.
It's really
Yeah?
good. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really good. It's very
Old school.
expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's the best. It had been the best analog hardware tape emulator on the market.
Right.
And
I've
so
got a
I always knew
Birditch.
like,
A Birditch
which one?
Density. I've got a Birditch Density. Have
Oh,
you ever heard of
okay.
them? It's just right here.
Yeah.
They're
It's a little
quality, man.
different than a little different than tape though, right?
It's it kind of does a tape thing. It does
Yeah.
it does like when I've put it on mixes and compare things. It's fucking great, man. I love it. It just
Cool.
it does something to the sound because it's got like bumps in it and everything like that. It's not. It
Yeah.
doesn't have It doesn't have like what do you call that thing? Not aliasing. There's a kind of thing in tape. Anyways, I don't know. But yeah, I don't think it's fully like
Bias.
bias. Yeah, it doesn't have a bias thing. It's got kind of got similar thing like a bias with to do with there's a bump, and when you can, it's so the bump changes the curve. So there's a low bump, and then a kind
Okay.
of shelf of a that goes mid low, and then
Okay.
there's a vintage kind of little switch on it, which kind of takes some of the top end off. So there's a
Okay.
few little things on it. Yeah, but I think it's cool. Anyway, sorry.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I knew what obviously I had real tape decks, I had a really high quality analog tape emulator. A
Mm.
fun trick. I would, because my Studer was so clean sounding, I would often do projects where I would use the Animod to change the character of the Studer deck.
Oh, that's cool, man.
So I would set the Studer, or I would set the Animod to like, so I would always use ATR tape on the Studer 2-track
Yeah.
deck. So I would set the Animod to maybe use one of the like Scotch, was it the Scotch 111? I forget what the tape
Okay.
formula was. I would use, or like 456 or something. And then, so I basically, yeah, use it to either change the character of the deck, like do like the Ampex 351 with the Scotch tape on the Animod going
Yeah.
into the Studer. So it was like analog emulating analog. Yeah, so that was fun. But when I was, yeah, I'd always kind of thought I would love to come out with a tape emulator that's kind of not any one specific deck, which seems to be what a lot of the plugin manufacturers do. They're like, oh, let's do a J37, or let's do this Ampex MM1200, or whatever they're emulating, or
Yeah.
Studer A800 or something. I was like, no, I don't want to. I just want to make. I want to make an analog emulation, tape emulation that creates a tape deck that never existed. Like
Uh-huh.
that creates like my perfect ideal tape deck. So let me pull the qualities I like from various tape decks I have experience with and try and like capture that in this hardware design.
Yeah.
And so that's what we aimed for. It was like we kind of drew upon our experience with existing things, but then tweaked the response of it to be just something musical that kind of is like yeah, draws inspiration from a bunch of stuff. And so when you use a real tape deck, you pretty much just put your tape on, and you hit record, right? It's like you set your levels and you hit record. But for some reason, plugin developers decided that people needed to have stuff to tweak. And so they gave people all these extra features like, oh,
Noise,
look, you
those
can,
fucking noise
yeah,
things.
noise and high frequency equalization and bias and all this stuff that you really wouldn't futz with unless you're doing a tape deck alignment. And the only
Ah,
time you need to align your tape deck is if your tape deck is out of alignment, right? And so like nobody sets up a real tape deck and says, oh, let me futz with the high frequency equalizer on this
right.
drum track. Like you just, I don't know. It's just not how you use the tape deck.
Yeah.
So I thought my analog tape deck emulator is going to have an experience that is authentic to really using tape, which means you get to set how hard you hit it, and that's it. It
Yeah.
it's a tape deck that has a sound,
Yeah.
and I've given you two choices for that sound, which are these two little jumpers. And you know, you can either turn on or off the low frequency head bump, and you can either turn on or off the high frequency. It's kind of like got this rising high frequency response, kind of like my actual MCI deck does. You can flatten that out. So at its flattest settings, we can call it more in the Studer 2-track kind of camp. Um, the stereo Mojo module that goes into the Silver Bullet has got like a bunch more jumper settings, so you can really kind of create your own
Yeah.
custom tape deck sound. But on this color module, I just really want it to be simple. And so I thought, could I make a 500 series module based off this Mr. Focus platform that gives people something that has a very streamlined workflow, not a lot of things to futz with, but feels creatively inspiring. So what I ended up doing is um, configuring things in a way with the this is the mass driver color module, which is effectively like it's our Rogue 5 discrete op amp, which is like a 2520 style op amp
Hmm.
driving a transformer. And so on the front panel, you've got record level, which is your input
Okay.
level. You've got output, which obviously is going to adjust the output gain. So this would be like the tape deck right here,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Obviously, this engages the tape process. Then you've got Mojo. This turns on that mass driver module. So you can think of this as like, this is your console Mojo.
Okay.
So this turns on, like if you think you're playing back your tape from your tape deck, it's got
Hmm.
to return into your console. So you're always listening to the sound of tape through a console, right?
Yeah.
So tape playing back through console. And then you've got this knob is the emphasis knob. So you can engage emphasis. And then there's a texture switch. And this
Uh,
what this allows you to do is kind of tilt that frequency response. So but it's on Mr. Focus, that fulcrum frequency of the filter is kind of more in the mid range.
mhm.
This pushes it a little lower. So what
Uh,
ends up happening is it changes how the low frequencies are emphasized
okay.
in the sound. And so with the texture switch, it's changing where this filter is in relation to the tape process. So it's either before the tape process or after the tape process. Are you a
Oh,
guitar player?
so you can saturate it.
So you can change how the tape saturates, right? So
Uh-huh.
you can either have things getting kind of like flubby and swampy, or you can have things getting like tighter and more harmonically rich through the mid range. It can be
Right.
subtle or it can be really obvious depending on how hard you're cranking things. So yeah, I call it emphasis because it allows you to kind of emphasize where the saturation happens. And you get a different result depending on whether the texture switch is out or in. If it's out, it's like more um, aggressive and present and in your face. But when it's in, it feels like smoother and more relaxed.
Mm.
Are you a guitar player by any
Yeah,
chance?
yeah.
All right, so if you've got an overdrive pedal.
Uh-huh.
You ever put like an EQ pedal, like a Boss GE7 in front of your overdrive? And like,
Never. Never.
okay, okay, well, how about this? You've got a Marshall amp and you've got a Tube Screamer or a Boss SD1 in front of
I have a tube
your
screamer, that's for sure.
your ripping, JCM 800 or Plexi, right?
Hmm.
So if you look at a Tube Screamer, it's like all mids, right? The low
Yeah.
end is rolled off and the
Yeah.
top end is rolled off. So it's
Yeah.
basically one big mid push.
Yeah.
And so when you push all those mids into the amp saturates, but because the overdrive pedal is rolling off the low end, well, I should say, here's the low end on this side. Because the overdrive pedal is rolling off the low end, um, it keeps the bottom tight. You're
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
saturating the low end, but those mids are saturating the tubes. So it's like you can kind of think of it the same way with one track. So when
Mm.
you crank emphasis and you've got texture in, it's like if you're turning the knob to the right, you can really push the mid range
Right.
and really saturate it. And as you're pushing, it all depends on the source. But let's say you got a guitar track. If you've got a pretty high input level, you can kind of start turning this to the right, and then it kind of gives you headroom to like push the level even harder
Cool.
without the low end
Yeah,
causing
yeah.
some like shitty breakup, I
Flubby
guess.
shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
cool, man.
yeah,
Shit,
so
that
it's
sounds
fun.
class.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
fun. So between all those controls, you really can kind of create different tape vibes.
Right. Wow, man. That was difficult to make that. Because I heard tape is quite the kind of like You know, it's the kind of,
Yeah.
it's the most sought after kind of sound. Like, you know, there's reverbs and there's compressors and there's this and that. But tape, definitely in the plugin world, like everyone goes, this plugin tape, this plugin tape. I think the
Yeah.
Chow tape is actually the one that I think is a decent plugin tape. But
Which
I
one?
think Chow plugin, this guy, he's a designer in college and he makes it. It's a free plugin. It's called Chow Tape, but
Oh,
it's
cool.
got like I know we were talking about control. This thing has fucking
Yeah.
everything, but it's really good. Like it's really good. I forget what he did. He did it as like a dissertation. This plugin, I think it was a dissertation, but it's really well done. It's really well.
That was cool.
It has a sound to it. You know. Anyway, sorry I interrupted you.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, so is it difficult? Yeah, it is kind of difficult. I think the thing about tape that maybe people that are not experienced with real tape decks don't have an appreciation for is, everybody likes to talk about like the saturation. Like if you're making a record to tape, yes, you can take advantage of these characteristics, this non-linearities, and and the limitation. You take advantage of the limitations of magnetic tape
Uh-huh.
to achieve a certain sound. Like, your kick drums and snare drums will sound fatter, your guitars will sound richer, your vocals will sound smoother, your bass will sound bigger. But nobody's using it like as a distortion box. Like I think that's the tendency with plugins is people like everything's like an effects pedal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah.
it's like you turn it up to stun. And so I think one of the underappreciated qualities of tape is not the saturation is whatever. I think the thing that really is where the magic is the phase shift that occurs with tape.
Right, right.
And so it's like it changes the timing of how certain frequencies hit your ears. And so when you've got a bunch of tracks in a mix all hitting tape, it changes it's almost like you've changed the groove of the drums in relation to the bass in like just the right way. It's like these really subtle changes where it's like all of a sudden the snare drum isn't poking you in the eyeball, it's laying back. And now the way that you hear the kick and the bass drum feels different because of that relationship to the snare drum. And vocals end up sounding like smoother. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's like a subtle thing that's hard. I feel like when I first started making records to tape, I didn't have this appreciation. Like I couldn't hear it. It was like NAMM or AES one year, and the Animat had just come out. And I was excited to see what this device was all about. And I went to their booth, and they had a little demo set up with I took the headphones, put them on, and I'm like, I never heard a tape deck other than my 4-track at this point.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, I listened to tons of records that had been made to tape, but I never had actually worked with a professional tape deck at this point. And I put the headphones on, and I'm like turning up the gain, and I'm like, I don't hear it doing anything. And I had to crank that input knob until it was like grossly distorting
Yeah,
before
yeah.
I could hear it doing anything. And I was just like, that's tape? And I was like, I must be missing something. And then it made me so curious that I went out and started buying tape decks. And I think, over the
Right.
next few years, I ended up acquiring like 4 different tape decks and really started getting into it. And it wasn't until, I'd been working on tape for a few years that I was like, or at least a good year and a half before I was like, oh, I kind of can hear it. I get it now.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
once you have that like experience base where you're like, this is what a record sounds like when I'm only working with the tape deck and the console versus now let me pull up a session in my DAW that was just recorded through A to D converters. You're like, oh, that's the sound.
Yeah.
Or that's the lack, or now I'm hearing the lack of sound.
Yeah, because DAW, like when you record, if you just record everything through a DAW, through your preamp, everything's like there. Everything's
Yep.
kind of there.
It's like this.
Yes, exactly. It's like totally upfront, but tape and stuff adds this kind of texture, like it pushes things in back but in the
Yes,
right
there's a
kind of
depth.
places. Yeah, there's a depth. It's more
There's a
3D.
three
Yeah,
there's a 3D sound. And it's
yeah,
like you will never experience that unless you are hearing the playback off the tape through a console with no digital converters.
mm,
And this goes back to my point about that first conversion pass. The second that you go through the A to D, I don't care how good it is. Obviously a really nice A to D is going to do less damage, but that's where I notice the depth disappear. And that's where it becomes like 2D. And
yeah.
so for me, so I started doing all these tests with different converters to figure out like what converters are the most faithful reproduction of my tape recording.
Uh-huh.
And what I ended up settling on was some old Radar 24 converters from 1999, 2448.
Oh,
To me,
cool.
those sounded better than recording 2496 or 2492 using my
Wow.
Mitex,
Wow.
um, because it just sounded like less damage had been done.
Okay.
But still, if you pull up if I put the tape on the tape deck and I run it through the console and I play it back, you literally can close your eyes and it sounds like the people are in the room with you,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Whereas like you play it back from the DAW and you're like, yes, I'm playing back some audio from my
Yeah,
computer.
yeah, yeah. I totally get you, man. I a while ago I had got these. I don't know where I got them, but anyways, it was an 8-track of no, it was a reel. Sorry, reel to reel. Someone sent me them of Fleetwood Mac Rumors. Like this shit sounded like the sound of this thing was just unbelievable, man. It was just like you were saying, it sounded like they were in the room. It was just like
Yeah.
just unbelievable. Like the drums on Dreams just so everything's so big, but not like big nowadays records are. Do you know what I mean? I just had this kind of like
Yep.
engulfed you more than like, because modern records I
Yeah.
find they're very scooped, and a lot of older records there's a lot more like lower mids in like older records than
Yeah.
like newer, and these kind of scooped records. I don't. They make things sound cleaner, and you're thinking, oh, that sounds really
Yeah.
clear, but actually when you compare them, like even the old jazz records, like none of them are scooped. They have like tons
Yeah.
of
No.
like low
Yeah.
mids. They sound incredible. Like this
Yeah.
sound incredible. I think that's kind of a thing too. Like scooping things isn't, Metallica. Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, Scoop.
Yeah. I listen to I've never been much of a classic rock fan, but for some reason the other day I decided to put on Apple Music, I listened to some Pink Floyd
Oh, I love
and
Pink
I was
Floyd, man.
like, it's like what year was that record made?
Dark Side of the
Um
Moon, 74.
or the Wall, what year is the
Wall would be
Wall?
78, 79, that kind of time frame.
Yeah.
Even 80,
I
maybe it
could
was even 80, but that kind of frame.
yeah, I couldn't believe like how it didn't sound dated. It didn't sound like
No.
it sounded huge. Yeah, just like you're
Yeah.
saying, it sounded
Yeah.
huge and clear and detailed and everything was there. I'm sure it was a remastered version.
Yeah.
So there was probably, the remaster probably had a little more of a modern EQ curve on it, but
The snare sound,
yeah, it
man, on that
just
record, Uncomfortably Numb, is amazing. It's just like
yeah,
there. It's incredible.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the song I was listening to. And it was just like, I was just like, if I didn't know that had been recorded in the 70s, I would think that it was a brand new record.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I don't know. Do you know Spirit of Eden by Talk Talk?
Maybe.
Dude, that is like one of the greatest records ever made. The sound of it is insane. Like it's fucking just, it's amazing. Like that record, the whole story about it is amazing. Yeah, you should check that out. That is
Cool.
you want a record that just like would blow your mind when that comes on. Like there's a guitar that kind of kicks in at the start, and it's just like, I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, holy shit! It just totally like was like, oh my god! It's like, those kind of moments when you listen to some music and you just like, oh man, it just gets you like that. I remember the first time I heard
Yeah.
that. It's called a song called The Rainbow, and because it's really like starts off really mellow, all these kind of sounds. You're like, what the fuck's going on here? And then this guitar comes
Yeah.
in, you're like, holy shit! So yeah. Well, speaking of
Yeah, I'll
records,
check that out.
before I let you go, I'm blabbering on here. What records like do you mean a lot to you that you love that kind of still mean a lot to you, or were informative
Oh,
records when you were growing up? Because there's those records that kind of like are records when you listen to them young and they're still kind of today mean a lot to you.
Yeah. So I'm a 90s kid. So like a lot of my musical tastes were formed, I would say, in the early and mid 90s.
Okay.
Um, so for me, like I think I'll answer your question like this. Records that made me pay attention to sound
Hmm.
were Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream.
Oh yeah, man. So good.
Um, there was a band, I was really into a lot of bands on Sub Pop in the mid 90s. And there was this band out of Canada called Eric's Trip. And um, they were kind of like this lo-fi band. They did all their own recordings, like on a, it was either like a reel-to-reel 8 track or 4 track, like in their, wherever they practice in their house or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, check it out. Yeah, they're super lo-fi, but it was a really impactful record. There was a few records. The first one's called Love Terra. Then the second record was called, I can picture the cover on in my brain here. Um, it'll come to me.
Okay.
But anyway, it made an impact because I had just gotten this cassette 4 track and I was learning to become a musician and a songwriter. And here I am listening to the Smashing Pumpkins record, which had just come out, which sounds amazing. And I remember, and the Muffs record too. The second Muffs record, Blonde and Blonder, had just come out. That sounded really cool. That record was done by oh, I can't remember that guy. Anyway, the guitar sounds are amazing on that record. Are you familiar with the Muffs?
No, no.
They're a pop punk band from California. Singer passed away a few years ago, but yeah, they're really awesome. But anyway, these records sounded, big studio productions, like made to tape, amazing tones. And then here's this Eric's Trip record that they made in their house on whatever crap equipment they had. And I was like, it was so empowering for me because I was like, that's me. I have a 4 track. I've got 2 microphones. Like if they can make a record, then I can make a record.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
You
get
know?
you. You probably like My Bloody Valentine too.
Yeah, I do. I do. I mean,
Irish band.
I think I was too young. Yeah, I think I was too young when they first came out, but I ended up seeing them when they had a reunion tour like back in the
Yeah,
early 2000s.
yeah, yeah, yeah. My Bloody
Yeah.
Valentine, brilliant.
Very loud show. Very, very loud show.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, man. I need to like anywhere I go, even up to the shop. I have to wear. I have a thing called hyperacusis, so everything's like loud for me. Like everything's loud.
Mm.
Like if you flick a cup, it's too loud. So I have to wear earplugs just kind of everywhere. So like concerts can be a bit. I seen the Pumpkins actually about 6 months ago. It was ridiculously loud. Even with my like
Yeah.
special earplugs, I was like, holy shit, that was loud. Like, but yeah, I'd never seen the Pumpkins before, so it was like quality. Man, Pumpkins are just, I think, an underrated band. I think they're totally underrated. Like Melancholy is amazing. Like
Yeah.
that's a
I
great.
mean,
Even
they
Adore.
constantly, yeah, they constantly reinvent themselves. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I saw them on their most recent tour last year.
Oh,
Was
that'd be
it?
the same tour, the Autumn tour, was it?
I think so. Yeah, it was within the last year or two. I saw them at a big like outdoor amphitheater, and yeah, it
Oh,
was loud.
cool. Did that new
Yeah.
guitarist? The girl was playing guitar. She's a great guitarist. Kiki, I think her name is.
No, it was before her.
Oh,
It was when Jeff Schroeder was
oh,
in the
right,
band.
right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was a good guitar player too, man.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
the guitar tones, I mean, yeah, sound was phenomenal. All the guitar tones sounded amazing. Obviously, Jimmy's drumming was incredible, and Billy was like just ripping it up the way he always does. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was good.
Quality band.
I'd seen them back when they toured for Melancholy. Um,
Oh, you seen them in that era? Wow, dude.
I also saw them Lollapalooza 1994.
Fuck,
Um,
man, that must have been class.
I'll send you the video, the show that I saw, the Lollapalooza performance that I saw. It was in New York City.
Yeah.
And I was 18 years old. Somebody recorded it. It's up on YouTube. I'll find it and I'll send it to you. I watched it and I was like, that's the show I was at. I was like trying to find myself in the audience, but
that's quality, dude.
But yeah.
Man,
but I mean,
quality.
Yeah, but 27-year-old Billy Corgan had a different energy than,
Totally.
58-year-old Billy.
Yeah, man. It's just, you have to like
or however old he is these days.
But like when you look back at those old videos, it looked, even the crowds were going fucking crazy. Like the crowds are like every song, even the mellow songs, they're jumping. And now crowds are like, it's weird. Like people, it's. I find it weird. I'm like, I do be at a gig. I'm like, why are you not jumping? This is class.
Yeah. That year at Lollapalooza, Beastie Boys headlined.
Shit.
And actually, I think it was Beastie Boys and Smashing Pumpkins were co-headlining, and then depending on the day, they would trade off on who closed out.
Right.
But Beastie Boys went on before Smashing Pumpkins, or maybe it was Smashing Pumpkins were headlining the whole thing. Anyway, Beastie Boys went on right before Smashing Pumpkins, and this was the what's the big Beastie Boys record?
Sabotage.
Sabotage. It was that record that was out, and man. I thought I was gonna die. Dude. Like it was a mosh pit farther than I could see, and it was like you're levitating because the people around you are like smashed into you and just moving you.
Yeah.
And I was just like, please let me live long enough to see this fucking stuff.
Man, some of those mosh pits were mad. Like, jeez, I remember.
But it's exactly like you say.
Yeah,
it's exactly like you say. Like it was just a sea of people moving violently.
Yeah, they were crazy, man. Even when I was young, like that whole kind of like metal scene was out. Oh, it's crazy, man. I got my nose broken in a mosh pit when I was like 16. It was like fucking mental, dude. Hey, man, dude, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, and I had a really great time chatting to you, man. So the one track's out now, or is it pre-order, or what's the story?
It's shipping probably shipping it this week. It's been pre-order. I think I need to update my website. We were just waiting on some stickers to arrive. Okay. But yeah, it's shipping now. I think the price. What's the price? $5.99 or something like that.
Okay, that's cool, man. Well, man, hey, dude, thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome.
I had a great time talking. Hope the long COVID gets sorted for you, and all that jazz. Try the sauna, man. Not saying it'll, doesn't hurt, man. Doesn't hurt,
All right, brother. Give it a try.
Yeah, give it a try, brother. All right, man. Great to talk to you.
Thanks again.
Yeah, you too, bro. Have a good evening.
All right.
Take care, bro. Talk soon. Bye-bye. Bye.